everyone. Delighted to be here. If I look dazed and confused a little bit, it's the lights in my eyes. I can't see any of your faces. Really thrilled to be here. This is my first time at HotelSpaces. I'm Kavitha Iyer. I am head of design and design strategies at IHG Hotels and Resorts, and really thrilled to be here. In my role, I head up building and shaping design personalities and design product across all of our 19 brands, now 19. And I get to work with several of my fellow IHG friends who are here, who if you've not met them, please meet them. A talented group of individuals that really focus on some of the things that we're going to talk about today, really shaping value intrinsic design solutions that really optimize returns and make it better for business. So, David, to you.
Sure, thank you. Good morning. Again, it's we need our sunglasses up here. We can't see anything, but this is my second time at HotelSpaces. It's a great group. It's a wonderful venue. What do you guys think of the hotel? Hotel's awesome, isn't it? Yeah. Really nice hotel. Good to see. Great to see growth and continued growth in the North Texas area. But yeah, so I'm with Senior VP of Design and Construction with Aimbridge Hospitality, and I've had a variety of roles in my career. I've been on the brand side, the ownership side. I'm an architect, so kind of bring together more of a holistic viewpoint of how we solve these problems. And I think working very closely with the brands, as many of you guys have probably heard me in the past on other panels say, you know, our brands are our allies. We have to work together with them very closely. But then again, there's also a little bit of give and take and push and pull. So, you know, we're going to talk a little bit about that today. But excited to be here and hope you guys have a wonderful time.
Hi, my name is Kevin Filer. I'm with Davidson Hospitality. We're part of the KSL Capital Group. This is my first time as well at HotelSpaces, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Dan Hansen. I'm the global head of the Hyatt Studios brand. I love the intimacy of the conference. Looking forward to meeting a great number of you. Like David, I've worked a lot with the brands. I was an owner for 20 years, multiple brands. So I've been with Hyatt for 5 months. So I think I can bring a unique perspective from being the pain in the ass owner dealing with brands for a lot of years. But I'm here with Gary Dowens from Hyatt, who heads global design, who's probably forgotten more than I'll ever know about that portion of it. So he's your guy if you got a lot of questions. But happy to be here and looking forward to the panel.
So this is exciting. I'll sort of kick us off today. We're just going to have a really fluid dialogue, and we hope that we do welcome any questions from you. We'll probably take questions at the end of our discussion and set some time aside for that. But, you know, as we were talking about preparing for this panel, you know, we have brand and owner, as Dan mentioned, as well as those on the investor side. You know, we're going to kind of talk a little bit about all of the conversations that have been going on for the past, I don't know, 3, now going to be 4 years, right? And as we come out of what has happened over the last 2 years, we're specifically kind of going to hone in on what's on everybody's mind, these PIPs. I'm looking at Tom over here, my friend from before, and these rather what we would call tough conversations that we have amongst us, right? What do we require as the brand house and what we hold true towards better business versus conversations that we have with owners. So I'm going to probably hand it over to you, Kevin, to maybe speak to what's on your mind when you're kind of reviewing and analyzing how you're approaching PIPs and the kind of conversations you're having with brand folks.
So, you know, as you know, a lot of the PIPs were delayed because of COVID. And so now a lot of the brands are coming back and asking for PIPs that had been delayed to be moved forward. And of course, funding is limited at this point. So we've been spending a lot of time reviewing PIPs and seeing where the best value is for the money. And what I mean by that is, you know, when we approach things, we always look at a return on investment for projects. So if a PIP really talks about maybe a restaurant that's, maybe it says a light refresh of a restaurant, soft goods, but wants a full renovation of the guest room and bathroom, you know, we might be able to look at the restaurant and say, well, if we put a little bit more money and reconcept the restaurant, we could probably get the revenue up to 20, 30%. And the bathroom's actually in pretty good shape if we just refinish the vanity and mirror. So that, my point being is that we'll put together our own strategy and then go back to the brand. And we've been finding that the brands have been fairly open to those discussions. Whereas they'd say, well, maybe the restrooms, we could push back for 18 months or 24 months. And that really buys us the time. We can get in there, get the restaurant reconcepted, and start producing revenue along with the guest rooms, so higher ADRs. And then 18 months later with the additional revenue, the reserve fund's got a little more money in them, and we can go back and do the restrooms. So that's kind of been our strategy recently.
It's interesting when we were speaking about this on the brand side, what we think about is we've been hearing this feedback as well, right? And this is not new, where we focus on things that obviously drive revenue, right? Put those things first and then figure out how to deal with the rest of the scope. But I guess when we look at PIPs and some of the things that have been, stalled in getting towards even renovations, if you think about the costs that are involved in the overall PIP, right? What kind of percentage are you seeing that are actually driven by what brands hold true to making true to, being relevant, design focused versus what I would call infrastructural items, right? And that balance that we always try to talk about.
I think the challenge, for the most part, the PIPs that we see are pretty much spot on with regard to the condition of the asset and what needs to be updated to really build out and support, the estate throughout the entire brand. But what we also find out is, similar to what Kevin does, we do the ROI as well. We actually pull our market research and our intelligence from, a few hotels that we manage and actually create a list of, here are the things that the PIP requires, here's how you cost it out, and then here's another list of items that you could potentially go back and seek waivers and or take out of the PIP before the license is actually executed. But then on top of that, we overlay that and we let the owners know that, by the way, your infrastructure is failing, your roofs are failing, or your windows are failing, or whatever the situation may be, that's not really a PIP item, but that's an item you still have to consider. So with the added, the interest costs, the, interest rates that are still rising, the fact you got to put more capital in for a lot of these hotels right now that are reinvesting on the revolving credit, we still are trying to phase that work in. And 9 times out of 10, the brands are allowing us to phase the work in as opposed to eliminate the work. Because again, we go back to what's the biggest return on the investment? How does it affect your GSS scores? And how are you actually building out the entire hotel for the guest experience? And that's the first thing we keep in mind is the guest experience. So,
yeah, I've always found it incredibly complicated to get a project done. If you think about the parties that are generally involved, you have the brand, and you have the owner, you have the management company, which may or may not be the owner. And then you've got, the vendors and the suppliers, and like how to get all 4 of those groups together to agree on something when things largely need to be based on am I going to get a return on this investment capital has always been a challenge. And, it kind of reminds me of, when you're sitting around talking about, your child. You always think they're a little bit smarter than they probably are. They're a little bit better athlete than they probably are. And owners look at the hotels that way. Well, mine's different. Mine doesn't need this. Those other ones are terrible. Mine doesn't need this. Mine's good. And that always comes out in this, guest satisfaction. And I think for the one thing that I learned over the years is guest satisfaction really does matter. And I remember, it was the early 2000s when Marriott made us go to 9-inch mattresses from 7-inch mattresses. And it was like, well, that's just dumb. It's going to be $600,000 at the time. It was like, boy, the guests really liked that. It was like, wow, okay then, guess the bed matters. And so I always remember that, and I try to think as we go forward, what are the things that guests will like that will drive revenue to pay for that? We did LVT at the Marriott Courtyard in New Orleans, which at the time was not a brand standard, and I think we were actually said they were prohibited from doing it, but we did it anyway. and now that's a brand standard in Courtyard. So try to be thoughtful about how, but it was more expensive than carpet, clearly, but it lasts. And so to think about, when you're solving for this, complicated equation, whether you're a vendor, a contractor, an architect, the brand, or the owner, or the management company, like how can I be thoughtful about getting the cost down and the return higher? And that blended together, is while complicated, always seems to result in a good renovation.
And I think to add to that also is having that initial conversation early on, defining those expectations, resetting those expectations, because 9 times out of 10, the PIP comes in, you read it, you price it at face value, and realize, well, wait a minute, that's really not what we should be doing. So have that dialogue and that conversation. Know where to push back because you know your hotel better than the brand does, but actually have the dialogue, and I think that is often missed in the PIP process.
So I like what you said earlier too. Impressions matter, right? Things that we talk about in terms of guest love. It's not just a score that we on the brand house side look at and deem that it needs to be a certain percentage. It's every one of those guests takes something away in today's marketplace between social media and all of the reporting that you get. Those things are multifold, right? One person's impression times 10. Imagine what that does to the entirety of the brand, right? So in other words, what we try to think of as being allies in the investor groups, and more so we're listening to the feedback that we hear and we're trying to do something about it. So we try to get out of language that are referencing brand standards, obviously fire, life safety, and the basics of what design is and what a building and architecture need to deliver are true. But in terms of brand standards, we try to look at it in terms of what does the property in that particular market need? How do you stay relevant? How do you get ahead of staying relevant? Because for every day that you sit on a property that feels less so, is receiving less impressions, you're teeing yourself for another arena where there's more new product coming into the market that will take away from your investment. So that's one of the sort of the broad brush goals of kind of really talking through a PIP with our owners these days is not only speaking to the ROI, as you talked about, Kevin, as well, but also trying to really navigate sort of the cost points of the other things that also keep the property relevant. Which brings me to another thing I'd really love to understand in terms of costs, right? I know this is top of mind for everyone, inflation, all of the things. And we understand, whether you're spending money in repairing infrastructural issues or keeping the brands relevant, how do you, and we've all talked about the ROI factor, but how do you really map that to how you apply it to different brand segments, right? I'm sure each of you has various segmentations of brands that you play in, from select all the way to the upper upscale. How do you think through that?
Well, actually, we're mostly scale. Full upper upscale and independent lifestyle hotels, but we do have resorts, and so that is a little bit different. And each brand we look at differently, but to be honest with you, it's all local based. So whatever we do, we look at what can be done for that specific resort in their locale. And one of our favorite things now is that the brands don't require pools now in most of our city center hotels, and those spaces are pretty beautiful spaces that you use for meeting or for other flex spaces, and we've had a lot of success in converting those. And so those are things that we go back to the brand on. Most of what we do before we actually get the PIP from a brand is we actually do our own PIP and do our own PIP estimate and prioritize the things we think are the most important. And we always wait for the PIP to come in to compare the two. And there's always differences because obviously our general manager and our team on site, as well as our regional teams and then our corporate teams. We have our own Davidson restaurant group, so we have some input there. We have DH Creative, which is our branding and social media team. So we're looking at our competition all the time, and it's trying to make sure that we're moving up in that market. And so, do we need additional meeting space? So the PIPs are great, but we want to have something that we can go back and say, well, this is great, but we also want to do these things, and we only have this bucket of money, and then the negotiations start there.
Absolutely.
I think the way we approach it is We actually realize that there are going to be some things that are going to have an ROI positive, and then there's things that are going to be an ROI negative. But we always try to position it, look at it full spectrum, analyze it, understand it, and then we have to go back to the brand, negotiate with the brand, and we never make it about cost, because the brand's first thing they're going to tell you is, you signed up for this anyway, you should have known, it's not our problem. So how do we actually flip the script around and discuss the practicality of whether it makes sense or not? Give you an example. We've got a project, Marriott's asking us to take out P-tax and put in 4-pipe fan coil HVAC system. However, there's not enough clearance within the vertical height floor to floor. There's not enough space. There's no way to run it vertically down the outside of the building. It's just impractical. So instead of just going to the brand and saying it's impractical, we went back and did the full analysis on 4 different systems and came back and sat down with them and explained it to them. And then they're like, oh, great. And then what we said is we'd take that money and we'd apply that money elsewhere within the budget that would actually provide a positive return on the investment, i.e. more meeting spaces, because the hotel really required meeting spaces. So we analyze it from that perspective because, again, you want the asset to be a positive ROI on the entire asset, but you also want to drive those guest satisfaction scores, and how can you capture more of that market? So you've really got to go out and do your intelligence, really understand what's your comp set. And sometimes owners, as Dan mentioned, owners think that their hotel's the best hotel and they have their own comp set, but 9 times out of 10, their own comp set is not even the real comp set. So broaden that and really look at it more inclusively, and come up with a solution. And then when you sit down and discuss it with the brands, 9 times out of 10, they understand.
We speak about competition, and Dan, I'm going to throw a question your way. You just took on a new position for Hyatt Studios. And as we think about, the landscape of competition, we know that there's been so many brands, inclusive of ourselves, where we launched Burner in August in the conversion space. We know what soft brands are and that sort of mechanism in the premium environment, but this is the first time we're talking a different format. And a lot of that came from the ownership community, right? How do we approach sort of a very flexible approach to conversions? I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about your approach.
Yeah, it was one of the great things I've enjoyed being at Hyatt, even though I haven't been there that long, is understanding from a more global scale what it means to have flexibility in conversions with multiple brands. On the select service side, we had a couple full service hotels, but largely our hotels on my prior job as an owner were centered around prototypical hotels. It wasn't until the last 5-6 years that we were doing custom projects and adaptive reuses, and the sense of guest preference has continued to change. Unique and local, genuine, are terms that experiential. Those are all the terms that keep coming up. And so, as you think about whether it's a Marriott Courtyard, whether it's an AC, whether it's a Tribute, whatever soft brand or brand you have, what are the things that we can do to create, a sense of arrival, a sense of belonging, and a sense of being? And at Hyatt, we've got a number of brands that kind of fill those goals, and the flexibility and the ability to tailor make in a creative way what that means to the guest in the local market, I think will continue to be important. Because if you think about the old way brands used to think, it was always about consistency, right? We want every Courtyard to look the same, every Hampton Inn to be the same, every Hyatt Place to be the same. And they're just not. There's just too many out there, and their ages are too different, and they're owned by different groups, and they've had them different. They're never on cycle. And so, what are some of the key elements that will give you kind of the tie-in to the brand, whether it's Hyatt, Marriott, Hilton, IHG, any of the others, and do those things translate into repeat guests? And newer and cleaner always wins. Unique and fun and creative always wins. That's why it's interesting to hear about the creative side of your firm. And I think that has to be kind of top of mind, whether you're doing even a prototypical hotel versus a conversion to something. How do we capture this next guest in a unique environment and provide an Instagrammable moment at some point along the way? So that's a long answer, but it's something that really enjoyed spending my time at Hyatt, working with the team to understand, on a broader spectrum what that actually means.
You used one of my least liked terms, and I like that you're kind of pivoting away from it too, is this term of consistency, right? I think we've all been over inundated with this expectation of consistency that never really delivers, right? But reliability, and Brian knows this as I talk about it often, is reliability is far more important for what a guest expects, right? I want to have a reliable experience, right? I want to be able to have my expectations, my basic expectations met. And I think in the genre of what soft brands are, that is what you're going for, right? A reliability of meeting expectations at a certain quality, while at the same time having the impression of value balance, right? Where we're trying to have our long spreadsheet of items that we're trying to manage. But whether from our side, with Lissa managing Voco, we have Vignette on our premium and our luxury end, where we really offer owners this opportunity to say, create your scope to meet your market advantage, right? And tell the story, right? So it is an original, the word authentic that we also love as designers to use, where it creates that everlasting one-of impression, but do it at where it meets you and where your investment needs to meet itself. And Garner for us was, as you spoke about Hyatt Studios, I think for us it was meeting the owner at that mid-scale market to also provide them that softer engagement, right? So if you have scope, what are the reliable metrics? You spoke about the mattress. That's basic, right? That's that's an expectation that you have coffee in the morning. It's like a human right thing. I feel like it's my personal human right. Good coffee.
Good coffee.
Not that thing that used to come out of that old machine which had that layer at the bottom, right? Like good coffee. But these are basic things that every person has in their own home, and when they're on the road. You've been on the road since Wednesday, you said. And, I'm sure.
It feels like there's this desire for a more of a residential feel out there, whether it's new brands or conversions. Like how do you get it to feel a little bit more like home? And up until 10 years ago, if I walked into most hotels with the lights off, I'd know where everything was because they were all the same. And now I want to turn the light on and see what's there, because I think owners are being much more thoughtful, and the brands are being much more accommodative to try to find things that are more authentic and more local.
Absolutely. So Kevin, I wanted to ask you, what are some, as we've kind of entered this space, we talked a little bit about PIPs, what we focus on. I often think the audience is also very curious. You just spoke about lights that kind of triggered something for me on the owner side. We've been asking more technology, less technology. What are our thoughts on the spend there in terms of?
There's a return on investment, we'll do it. So it's about the type of technology. In meeting spaces, obviously technology is key. Restaurants, have the point of sale devices, things like that. That's improved service a ton. So there's that type, but forcing guest room technology is difficult. If they can find a way to get rid of the phone, we'll be happy about that as well.
The alarm clocks are going away.
And alarm clocks, we prefer that as well. So that's why we like the idea of brand guidelines over brand requirements, where you give us a guideline, like let's say the rival experience has to be elevated, and let us figure out at least what our ideas of elevated is, and give it back, and with the right design team, hopefully the brand will agree, and if not, then we'll work with the brand to get something that everybody's happy with. But the idea of guidelines versus requirements has been key, I think, especially in the soft brands, and that's why a lot of people move to them, because it allows it to be more local, and the experience to be more perfect for that location.
Absolutely.
If you think about technology, just having gone through this launching a new brand, we tried to start with a completely blank slate and say, like, what's the guest want when they get there, right? And going through years of adding access points and guest service complaints about whether we got enough high-speed access, and doing renovation, pulling more cable because now there's greater need. I think it's important as we've done at Hyatt, is to start with a blank slate. And how do you deliver something that is reliable and flawless, and with less friction points, where if there's an issue, there's one person to call. There's very few hotels that have really started with fiber to the room. So we took a stance and said, let's do fiber. And immediately it's like, wow, copper's cheaper. I'm like, is it? Have you seen the price of copper? It's like kind of high. And so, but what's the long-term longevity of copper? And like, to go back to the whole ROI thing, which everything seems to come back to ROI here. But if I've got to invest a little bit more upfront, but it gives me a future proof, then it's something we should consider. So I think as we go back to, where technology matters, is there an ROI on it? Is it just guest service? And is that enough of a pickup? My last company I ran was a public company, and we would do these reports to the board of directors about ROI on renovation projects, and they're like, wow, this one was so much better, why is this one not? And I'm like, well, because that one was 2 years behind. So the best way to get the ROI up is to let it die another year and let everything wear out a little bit more and let your market share drop, and then all of a sudden, hey, it's a better investment. So the challenge to ROI is think about like what the cost is if you don't do it, because it looks better if you just push it off a year or two. Then everybody looks like a hero. And so to try to balance that, lost market share, lost guest satisfaction. And I think that's the real dichotomy between the brands and the owners is, how do you balance that? Because quality just matters. New and clean and efficient matters.
Absolutely.
Technology, especially when you're talking about like fiber to the rooms, I think for new construction, it makes perfect sense. You go GPON, you get rid of your IDF closets, you pick up more square footage. So I mean, anybody's been developing new, probably is doing that. It's the renovations that are difficult. So that's where we're like, well, is the money really going to be well spent there, changing that up? But we do want high speed in the rooms, right?
Yeah.
Because we want people to be able to come in and be seamless by connecting their phone to the TV and doing whatever they want to do with it. So
yeah.
But I still think there's a basic, just a basic minimum that all guests expect is that we carry our smartphones around.
Yeah.
And when we're in our guest rooms, if we don't have signal, they blame the hotel.
Yeah.
And we still have to sort of crack that nut and figure that out, because there's this big hotel, you can walk in around it and you can pick up signal and you can't pick up signal. And I think that's really North Texas in its entirety. But how do you solve that problem? Because whether it's the hotel issue or the carrier issue, the hotel gets blamed for it because you're a guest at the hotel. So we've still got to work through those situations.
And how do you fix it without everybody saying it's the other guy's fault? Like that because the guests don't care about that either.
They don't care.
Brand's bad. Like, I'm never staying at fill in the blank again because my cell phone didn't work or I couldn't get on the TV, right? It creates a bad impression.
Yeah.
So David, I'm going to put you on the spot here. You've actually worked in a brand house, and now you're on the owners and investor side. What would you, what would you say would make it easier for you on the process side to the brand? If you had the option of speaking to a brand person, say, what could we do better on the process side? We're all allies here. We're amongst friends.
We're all allies. No, I think one of the things that, and I've been on Gaylord. I led design and construction at Gaylord, and then I led design and construction for IHG. And in those roles, I was on the third party prior to, before, and after. So I think the challenge is going back, and I learned something from Joel Eisman, who said, Joel would always say, I got a problem, get on the plane and go figure this out and go talk to the owner and then come back in. You've got brand design, you've got design and construction, you've got development, all these different players. Sit down and figure it out and come up with a solution that meets brand expectation, but also meets owners' expectations as well, and delivers the best possible product for the guest. And I think the challenge that I've had over the years, and I think the advantage I have, is being on the brand side, knowing where to push back, how to push back, when to push back. And I think also what I see is you still have individuals on the brand side that are reading stuff and it becomes black and white and there's no gray. And so having those earlier conversations and explaining and talking through, you're never going to solve all of the issues and you're never going to get your way. But having the conversation, talking it through, why do you guys want to do that? Help me understand that. Because we have to explain that to our clients and our owners. And 9 times out of 10, our owners are like, I'm not doing that. And you explain to them why, and it's like, oh, well, it makes sense. So I think communication and, you know, what the speaker said last night, you know, the songwriter, collaboration. We all work together. I think all of us in here realize it's a very collaborative environment. We all are seeking the best possible outcome with the end in mind being the guest that actually visits the hotel. And we've just got to work together collectively. So
Yeah, I just got here last night, so I haven't had as much a chance to talk to as many people. But the few people I did get a chance to talk to yesterday weren't just throwing business cards and saying, hey, you know, we want to be your next fill-in-the-blank supplier. Right? They were, here's what we do. How does that kind of fit with what you do? And to be part of the solution from a vendor supplier with the management companies, the owners, not just, hey, we want to do your fill in the blank. Like, here's what we do well. And maybe it doesn't work in all of your hotels, but maybe it would work in certain hotels. Yeah. You know, collaboration is the key word there. And so it's been great here. And I think that would be my one piece of advice for, you know, anybody out here that's, you know, been supportive enough as a sponsor here is, you know, help us with solutions. Because as we go through this, you know, negotiation and collaboration to try to find the right solution, I think that in and of itself will be incredibly helpful.
I do think we're at a point where 5, 7, 10 years ago, go back to the comment consistency. This is what we're doing regardless of what you guys want to do as ownership groups. This is what we're doing because we're the brand. And I think that came after the 2010 crash when we lost a lot of market share. How do you build it back up? I think brands are now receptive to let's figure out what's going to actually be the best solution for the hotel and have that conversation. There is that give and take because, like you said, when you installed the LVT, the brand said, no, we're not doing that. Well, now it's a brand standard. I think you just got to plead your case and be very convincing because your market may require something that's different than someone else's market, but have those conversations because you're eventually going to get through to the right person. I do think the problem also is don't try to leapfrog over the individuals that you work with because that creates a bigger problem when you say, you know what, I'm not going to deal with this individual who's reviewing these plans. I'm going to go straight to this person.
Yeah.
Well, then that just creates a whole shitstorm, lack of better terms, but that creates massive problems. So respect that chain of hierarchy as you go through it. But I think at the end of the day, brands want successful projects just as though owners want them.
Yeah. Look, okay, finally we get to disagree on something. Let's go. That works if the chain of command is thoughtful and accommodating.
Right.
And they're not.
Right.
You go over their head. And then it ends badly. But
right.
That's a two-way street.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we found that it's been great, and sometimes we found that it hasn't.
Right.
And that's not just indicative of any one brand or any one industry. You just get used to this is how we do things. This is what we use, and this is how we do things. And they get a lot of stuff thrown at them, so it's just easy for them to push the easy button and say, no, we can't do that. And so to have that collaboration takes the right people too at all the levels along there.
Some of the ways that we've been looking at it, and I love the word collaboration because that's truly how you can make a project successful, right? You have to meet the demands of that project, that particular owner and investment. And we've really been trying to finesse what is that protocol of design management, right? That there isn't a one-size-fits-all. You may ask for something, a submittal. You may have a review for protocol of reviewing it. What's the format of reviewing? Do you meet in person like you used to get on a plane? Which project kind of necessitates that type of delivery versus just looking at it on a desktop, and also the speed of responses, right? I think that's something that owners are also requesting, like let it not sit on a desk for that long. I think you mentioned that in some of our pre-calls that you can probably speak to, is how fast that we respond and how deliberate we are in the way we also respond. So those are some of the things on the brand house side that we've really been focused on, and hearing back from owners, right? Like, be very objective in your responses to us. Give us actual solutions that come, or connect us with the right vendors and suppliers, right? We always keep a roster of several of our suppliers and vendors, because you know best how to be able to deliver something at a particular cost price point, or be able to pivot to someone else who knows how to do it better. So those are some of the things that we've really been working on in the granular. Even if we don't purchase, we're ready to provide you the right assets. So it's a lot more proactive engagement. But you had some really good thoughts when we were kind of in the pre-plan on the sort of return of feedback from the brand side.
Well, we've had pretty good success with that. But again, we always enter the relationship as being a collaborative partner. We understand what the goal is of the brand, and we agree with the goal, guest satisfaction, right? So it's about also trying to tell a story, and so it's really on us as the operators of the hotel to help them understand what that story is, and how we could drive revenue as well as guest satisfaction with some of these things we're going to do. And we have to be thoughtful too, what things really make sense to delay. And we do have a big challenge. There's a lot of deferred maintenance out there, and you might have a $2 million reserve, but if you got $1 million of deferred maintenance, you only have a $1 million reserve. So that's a big challenge for us right now. But we've been very fortunate with all our dealings. To be honest with you, all the brands so far have been pretty accommodating, at least listening to our side of the story.
So one last topic before we open it up for questions here, and I think there's another panel tomorrow where my friend Joanna and Lori will be speaking as well. Sustainability. I'm sure we've heard endlessly about it, and it's top of mind for us. But at the same time, it's daunting, right? What does that mean? What is this larger breadth of the impact of where we're going? I think we all agree that we want a better tomorrow, but what does that mean for our assets? What does that mean for the value of our assets, and how much we need to invest in them to get them on this longer journey ahead? Kevin, I know in our pre-call, one of the things you talked about how you were approaching sort of sustainability in your company. Maybe you'd like to share.
Well, we've partnered with a number of vendors. Automatically, for every new asset that we bring on board, to do a lighting survey, to do a water survey. And we have a pretty good corporate engineering team. Chris is in the audience, who take a look at all the needs of the hotel and see where we're at with that regards to sustainability. But you could get a pretty big impact just with lighting and just with water, in terms of your bottom line. So it's not. I mean, we're helping the environment, but we're also helping the bottom line. So it's a win-win for everybody. So we've been pretty aggressive when we first take over place. We budgeted in. We know we're going to spend some money upgrading systems. We also do like kind of a TA study, a technical study, where you're looking at energy conservation measures, and for larger resort assets. And what we're really looking for there are ECMs that have a 2-year payback or less, mainly because most of our investors don't keep the assets for longer than 5 years. And so, they don't want to spend any money. It takes 2 years to get, the proof back into the equation. So our goal is to identify any ECMs, as well as doing a lighting survey, water survey. And we also look at trash as well, recycling.
It's interesting. It comes from a perspective of the hold term of an asset and how you invest in the property, but it's a reality that we face out there, whether through renovations. If it's not a long-term hold, there will likely be less enthusiasm for investing in not just things like that, but any renovation. And that's one of the other things that was always troublesome for the brand. Like, how do you kind of solve for that? I think we've seen a lot of changes in ECM measures, and I don't think anybody can argue that they're great for the brand. The one thing I learned after joining Hyatt was that how important that is to guests. As an owner, it's like, yeah, I know our guests. I mean, they're staying here, and here's how we mark, here's our revenue management. But from some of these national contracts, if you don't have a green hotel, like, you just don't get those, which was news to me. Like, they're actually making decisions, and I don't know how recent that trend has started, but it can be a real impact to the profitability. So again, it starts to, how do you get the return on investment? That's a little bit of a harder one to calculate. But from all the research that's been done at the brand side, more and more guests and certainly national accounts are choosing brands that have a great ECM measures.
On the brand side, we've, operational net zero objective feels like table stakes at this point, right? And when I say that, the basics, there's lighting, there's water conservation, and then there's sort of the measurables, in terms of light management, as well as some basic mechanical principles, right? P-tax, PTHPs, et cetera. So really thinking through what can we achieve by standardizing it through partnerships. And again, this is where we go out into the market to find advantageous partners to make it easier for the broad expanse of the ownership model, so that you don't have to try to figure out, right? Like, you had to do this whole math of how to get there. So a lot of our brand cohorts, other folks that I'm sure, and other companies are doing this. We're part of a sustainability, the Hospitality Sustainability Alliance. And it's really kind of forged the course of how we look at this operationally. For us, I think when we spoke to a lot of the ownership community, we hear this, what you just said, Kevin, right? Like, these are things you're looking at too, because it reaps rewards on your operational bottom line, right? I think the next discourse of the conversation obviously is in the embodied territory, which is fast coming. And again, I think that involves a lot more scrutiny, because again, it's best served on the brand side, where we start to look at it far more deeply, because it does involve product, partnerships with suppliers who can bring some of that inventiveness and innovation, so it's not embedded in the cost of the product itself. I think that's where we need to go next, because it's not a premium that you want to pay, that you can't recoup. But I guess in terms of net zero for us, where we felt really good allyship, mostly from the owner community. I don't think anyone's really pushed back, because it feels like it is the right way to go. David, anything on your end?
I think, we view it very similar to the way Kevin views it. We've got the bulk of our portfolio are select serve hotels, and our owners want to think about energy conservation and sustainability, but on the flip side of that, they don't really want to put that cost into it unless they see that return. And so what we rely on is we push it very heavily back to the design firms, making sure that you're buying sustainable products, and you've got that envelope, which, because that, the building departments and the codes have sort of rolled into that 15, 20 years ago. So a lot of that's already out there, but then the manufacturers are actually looking at ways. So we're leaning heavily on our manufacturers. We're doing the same thing that Kevin mentions, is when we bring assets in, we look at water conservation, we look at energy on our bigger hotels. A lot of our smaller hotels have already had lights retrofit, and they've already had plumbing fixtures swapped out, things like that. So what are some other ways of doing it? And it goes back to the return on the investment. Everything is return on investment, because when you've got a $2 million renovation and $1 million in deferred maintenance, and you got to roll things in there. It's how do you convince the client? And I think what we're relying on is the brands, and the brands helping us understand that you're losing market share because you're not falling into the green category. So how do we actually convince the clients to do that? And we're getting a lot of traction on that, but it's a challenge.
Is any of you three having success getting EV charging stations? Is there pushback there? Do people see the long-term benefits of that with the proliferation of new?
Most of our owners are wanting us to put them in at all their hotels.
Because it draws guests in, right? I think probably 30% of the market, at least the road warrior in a car, has at least a hybrid, right? So it's advantageous for them to offer that for their guests who come and park there. And I think it's also a draw. Yeah. Because now you're paying for the hotel and you get free charging, right? So to me, I think those who have EV charging probably merit in terms of choice. I was recently on this road trip, believe it or not, in a car in Europe, and it was interesting when I was picking hotels, I selected those that actually had EV charging versus not. And I'm sure that's more the case. You just don't know it until you look for it, right? And they have little symbols, back to what you said,
Yeah.
right? You have preferential desire and choice now that goes above and beyond just merely the relevance part that we talked about, right? Like in terms of product quality, it's also what can I get in terms of these things that I need that are part
Yeah.
of the journey.
As a reformed owner, I would have probably never done that. 'Cause I'm like, I don't have an electric car. I live in Texas. I drive a big truck. That doesn't work for me. But I went to a trip to Northern California, and I'm like, I'm going to rent a Tesla. And then I looked at where I was going. I'm like, ugh, I don't know. Here's one spot over here, and there's one hotel, but I'm not staying there. And like, how am I going to get home? Like, so I had to change my car. And so it's stuck in my mind about that would have definitely driven behavior. So
And also bottom line, you
Yeah.
can draw more guests in.
yeah,
Well, hopefully they'll standardize those chargers too.
yeah.
That's the biggest challenge right now.
Well, the Tesla was literally the cheapest car by a large margin. So I was like, I don't know.
And the fastest charger
And
too.
yeah,
So this is great. We would really love to welcome now any questions from the audience. I know.
Good morning, Donald Decker. Once I ask my question, you'll understand where I'm coming from. Hospitality has been 4-pipe chill water fan coil or PTAC or maybe VRF. Not a whole lot of geothermal or water source heat pump. As we talk about net zero and moving forward, what do you think about water source heat pump and geothermal in the hospitality space, 4-star, 5-star? And of course, I'm with an air conditioning company, so it's a loaded question. Thank you.
well, I'll start. Like, I love the concept of geothermal energy. I think it's a great way to create great value longer term. I imagine it's pretty hard retroactively to do some of the things that you need, but from a new construction perspective, I think the brand should wholeheartedly be embraced any way to reduce the energy consumption, because it is, a direct benefit to the bottom line, as Kevin said earlier, like water and lighting like that goes right to the bottom line. So I'm not sure all my opinions are exactly the same as Hyatt's. I haven't been fully indoctrinated yet, but like I should certainly be supportive of looking at a new construction. I think it's great technology.
Take my hotel and hospitality hat off, my code writing hat on. And our last topic here was the net zero. And we're working on the next 3 code cycle due to the fact that we have a mandate that we will be net zero by 2030 or 2033. We're seeing a lot of pushback because of, as we've about 10 years ago got rid of all the low hanging fruit. And now we're into fighting things which is going to cost money, substantial amounts of money, not only initially, but maintaining them. And we're trying to figure out how do you balance from the code writing standpoint of getting to this net zero to what you're talking about, this ROI, because the ROI does not work in 2 years. It's not there in where we're going with the energy code. It's out there at 8 years, 6 to 8 years. And that's our goal, is to get it less than 8 years. But we're seeing a lot of pushback on this. And my question to you, what can you give to us as a code writing body for the energy codes to be able to get to this net zero?
The question that I have is on, as I mentioned earlier, especially in the operational carbon side, we rely heavily on our partners who are in the spaces. Mechanical, for example, is one of my biggest examples that I try to talk about, is when you're investing so much money, right, you don't get a net return in 3 years or even 5 years, right? You're in for the long haul, and that may not be very viable for some investors. So what in the code environment, in the codified environment, are you doing in speaking and engaging with the larger mechanical engineering or the supplier and the products and the innovation market so that they can look at not just new build is easy, right? So that's really not an issue. But when it comes to conversion market, which is now closing in on around 40%, right? And it's going to remain there because that also feeds into net zero territory. What are we doing in terms of inventive ways to retroactively make these feasible so that there is a return on investment, right? Has the level of innovation and inventiveness in that marketplace caught up with the marketplace demand for the building typology? So I think that's the question. What are the conversations that the code folks are having with that cohort to allow for that to happen? Because as you mentioned earlier, it's still, you know, when you come to it, you don't have enough ways of doing it which are financially viable in the conversion arena. So that's what I would recommend.
Well, I think to really simplify the issue, it's remember when flat screen TVs came out and how expensive flat screen TVs were, and now you can go buy a 55-inch flat screen TV for a couple $100. It's I think relying heavily on the suppliers and innovation and technology and trying to find those creative solutions. It's going to take time. If it's an 8-year payback, you know, over the next few years, it's probably going to end up reducing that payback, but continuing to work very collectively and collaboratively with your suppliers and you know, just continuing to push the envelope and ask the questions, I think is the only way we're going to ever get there. And then we have to have owners that are going to be able to not only embrace it, but I guess fully embrace the fact that they're going to have to put a little bit more money into it, because when codes start enforcing it, there's no way around it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that ends up being a big responsibility of the brands. And I get to play both sides of it because I was an owner for a lot of years. Like I hate that answer, but the new builds, you can be very prescriptive. Here's what you need to do and here's why. It's not going to cost any more. You know, you're building it from ground up. There's a lot of the savings you can have early on. But when you start to go back through this conversion and adaptive reuse, it does start to get more challenging. And I think that is going to be will be one of the biggest challenges and hardest spots for the minds to meet. But if a brand is ever going to get caught up and the totality of whatever brand you have is ever going to get full value and full guest satisfaction and full guest preference, there's a point of turnover where the brands are going to have to mandate some of those things for the future of the brand. Otherwise, it becomes a realization of the old adage that this industry is not overbuilt; it's under demolished. You know, what's the next conversion brand to something downstream? And that in and of itself isn't good for guests. It creates greater inconsistencies, poor guest preference, where it just continues to validate this newer, cleaner always wins. So I think it's a great question. Obviously we didn't come up with enough of an answer to solve it here, but I think it's going to have to be pushed by the brands because it is important for the viability of not just the whole brand system, but for the industry.
But we're hoping that the brands don't push it until there's a technology out there they can reach. We understand the governments. We can't do anything about that. And I'm not sure what state you're talking about. But, it's nothing we can do about that. But the cost right now would just be prohibitive to do net zero.
I think we have time for one more quick question.
I'm dead center. So I'm Gail Meyer. I live in Branson, Missouri, and I guess a shout out to IHG because the last Formula Blue I did, IHG did a great job. They did a great job. But they came to the hotel and they met with me and we looked at stuff. And if that's not the way it's done in all cases, it should be done in all cases. So I also have an engineering degree, and what I would tell you is I see a lot of people who are drinking the Kool-Aid on this whole sustainability thing. I learned a long time ago, nobody does anything unless it saves you money.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Pure and simple. And so I agree with him. We hear all these things, but reality is different than the things. And people need to understand that. And I think people flock to good ideas. So my real question is, all of my hotels are in tourist areas. You really haven't talked about the difference in design between business and tourists. And my opinion is that design in a tourist industry or a tourist location, consistency died about 5 years ago because of Airbnb and VRBO. And I'm involved in both. And we see that in some cases, the hotels have to take a defense position and really try to identify more with inconsistency and local flavor. So how are you guys handling those kind of things?
I love that question, and this is something we do all day long. We spoke to it a little bit earlier, where it's about design that is appropriate for telling a local story, right? And we also talked a little bit about what is consistency versus reliability, right? So you spoke about Formula Blue. Love that you've invested in that. For us, as we think about balancing the nuances of whether a hotel is for a certain type of guest, right? If you're indexing on either business travelers or indexing on leisure, what have you, that's a conversation that you have at the front during kickoff. And there's various levers to pull in terms of how you pull that through, right? So if you have, for example, a prototypical model like the Holiday Inn Express, there are certain variations of what things look and feel like that we have as offerings. Again, for that particular guest typology that we'd like to reinsure in terms of reliability. Now, there are various other things in terms of food and beverage, right? And what I would call the cultural, operational side that you can lean into that could deliver some of the authentic parts if it's a leisure tilting market. There's amenities. We talked about pools or other kinds of extra things that you would need for the hotel that's not in the typical folio. And then lastly, what is it that you're trying to offer the guest in terms of impressions? And that's through whether it's art or anything that they take away with them, right? Again, I talk about the culture piece that lands within it. And the cultural part lies in what your operational offerings are that are above and beyond what you sign up for a brand, right? So if a brand has breakfast, are there plus ups that you would need to do for your leisure market to engage that and over-index on that? Or if it's just business and you want to just merely get business. So I would ask the questions at the kickoff side of the conversation with the design management group that will allow you to either convey that targeted towards one guest or another. The way we look at it from a brand house is we really want the guests to take away sort of a strong impression of reliability so they come back, right? Not only to your property, but to all other versions of that brand and that brand house so that you can build more brand strength. So it's a very good question, and we have really tried to work that based on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, my former job, we had a site in Orlando by Universal Studios, and so we designed a Hyatt house. This is 6-7 years ago, with bunk bedrooms. We had a resort-style pool. We had a great bar that opened up to the pool so you could drink and watch your children. And you can imagine when we sent those plans to Hyatt, it was just like, nope. And we're like, well, why not? This just looks like a great hotel, but how will people know it's a Hyatt? Like, well, they'll be booking it online. There'll be a sign out front that says Hyatt House. I mean, I don't know, like, what else do you want? And they said, well, it has to somehow resemble or get the feel. And so we worked diligently with them and came up with a beautiful hotel that's been incredibly successful. And more, we are seeing from all the brands, IHG, Marriott, Hilton, that flexibility specifically for resort style market, because it is different. It's a different guest, and you have to offer free breakfast for groups. And if you've got a group coming in, where's the bus going to park? And so we've got a spot for a bus to park, and we've got a huge room for luggage storage. And so it is a different animal. And so how do you kind of incorporate, at the kickoff, I think it is important. But I think you'd find a great flexibility today, much more than you would, 5-6 years ago.
We'll add to that blended travel, people who mix the two, right, and stay extra for leisure. which is a market unto itself. But I would ask the questions at the get, and you would find very positive responses these days, because post-COVID especially, that whole blended environment is very key on what kind of plus ups you want for your hotel.
All right, that's our time. We do build a lot of networking time into our schedule. So if you guys have any further questions that you want to follow up with any of our speakers here, I know they'd be happy to talk to you and continue this conversation. But thank you guys so much for this. I'm positive the audience very much appreciated it, so thank you so much.